Hey everybody, and welcome to the Freedom Adventure. My name's Jason, and welcome to the channel. The Freedom Adventure so far has been a video documentary about the conversion process of an old decommissioned ambulance slowly but surely over into what you see around me here, which is what we commonly refer to as our miniature Class C motorhome. There's several reasons that we chose the ambulance to build, but I'm not going to get into that, not in today's video here anyway. I had a little time on my hands today, so I wanted to kind of throw some value at you, if you will. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to stay at work. I've got a couple of sick pups which require a little bit of attention here today. While I don't have to be in the house with them, I figured I'd come up here to the shop, sit down, and share a few things with you. You see, since day one when we got started on this, we've taken on some pretty good-sized projects. We've also taken on a lot of smaller projects as well. But the one thing that they all share is things that I kind of figured out along the way. Things that I wish I could have maybe had somebody tell me before I got involved in doing them. So that's what I'd kind of like to do here today. What I'm going to show you here today is somewhat of a pictorial video, kind of like a compilation of photos and videos that I've shot along the way. And I'm kind of going to do just a little bit of a talk over and talk about all the little projects that we've done. And that insight might include some tips along the way, but it also is going to include some things that just maybe I would do different if I can go back in time. Or for that matter, if I choose to do another ambulance camper conversion in the future, maybe I'll choose to do them that way the next time around. Over the years, my wife and I have really wanted, one of our goals in life was to own some property and to build a little tiny cabin on said property. And furthermore, we would like to go ahead and build that property ourselves. That way we could say that we did it. Not to mention, it would be a tremendous cost savings over using somebody to do it for us. The problem is, every bit of property that we seem to be interested in is somewhere anywhere between about 3 and 4 hours away from the Oklahoma City area, which was where my wife and I live at. So the reality is, once we drive out there 3 or 4 hours, do a little bit of building, and turn around and drive home, you can see pretty quick that there's not a whole lot of time while we're there in order to do the things that we need to do. And if it's just an off-grid property, that means there's nowhere there to stay. So last year, and I won't get into the decision process of why we chose the ambulance, at least not in this video here, but that's what we did. We bought an ambulance so we can do the conversion. That way we've got a vessel to live in while we go ahead and build out our off-grid property. Now we'll talk about it more here in a little while, but we did end up finding the property of our dreams, and we purchased that property roughly about a month ago. So the race is on. We've got to get this thing ready to go. And the goal is here in the next couple of months to have it up and running and wheels turning on the highway. We've come a long way, but there's still just some things we need to wrap up. And to be honest with you, once I walk away from this, I want to walk away. I don't want to work on this while we're doing the cabin build, not at the same time. I'd rather get this to a point that we could just use it for its intended purpose. And if I'm working on this, it's going to be just because something broke. And I built it, so there is a high probability that that could happen, but whatever. So to start off with today, I'm not going to go into a deep dive as to what to look for when you purchase an ambulance. But the one thing I'm going to recommend first and foremost, if you're in the market, is to buy a tall box rig. Now there's a couple of different rigs that you can get, and from what I can gather, the boxes of these things are all pretty well standard sized. The 1-tons may have a slightly smaller in a lot of cases than what we're in, which is an E450, but for the most part it's pretty safe to assume that they're all roughly about the same size. And of course, when it comes to the size there, the more square footage the better. However, what I'd like to talk to you about isn't really that so much as it is the height of the box. And different coach manufacturers, they do offer different height units to go with. For instance, this one I think is a little bit over 6 feet tall. I'm 6'2" and I could stand straight up inside this ambulance, but I couldn't so much when we first got it. That all comes down to the ceiling that we removed out of it that came with it, and then we replaced it, of course, with the wood ceiling that we have now. The short box, on the other hand, there are a lot more of them out there, and I think you could still build one banging camper conversion out of those. The problem with that is you're going to spend hours and hours and hours and hours inside your camper conversion, and if you're a tall guy like I am, you're going to be miserable by the time you get done. As a matter of fact, it's probably going to add a lot of length to the conversion process just because you're going to be struggling in terms of having to hunker down while you're doing all the build. And another thing that I'll tell you, and I can vouch for this, is I've whacked my head more times in this thing than I care to mention, just getting in and out of the door. At one point I had that pad that's on the door up here missing, and I had to be down at corporate training down in Lewisville, Texas, like the next day. And that night I walked out and just about scalped myself walking out of here. I removed a chunk of flesh, which I don't even really care to go back and think about again. It was brutal. So that's in a tall box. If this was a short box, being as tall as I am, it could have been a lot worse than that, and thank goodness that it wasn't. So to start with, we'll just go ahead and talk about, how do you tell the difference between a short box and a tall box? Once again, folks, I recommend the tall if you could find one, and they are a little bit tougher to find, but if you could find one, it's the way to go, without a doubt. The first thing I'll point out is the distance between the top of the door and the top of the roof on this rig. This is the first indicator that this is a tall box assembly. And in comparison, you can see the distance between the door and the roof line on this one is virtually nothing, indicating that this is in fact a small box. On this rig, you could also use the distance between the cab and the roof, and this is another indicator of a tall box assembly. The distance here is pretty big. Whereas this one, on the other hand, you could see the lights there just barely fit in, and then they've got maybe an inch, maybe 2 inches above there and the roof. Another metric to look at is going to be the doors on the back. You could see on this vehicle, the doors are long and lean. Look like they're very tall, and the windows even are tall. Whereas on this one, the windows are short, the doors are short and stubby, and the distance between the base of the door and the top of the door is overall just short. So let's talk about one of the most intimidating things you can talk about when it comes to doing an ambulance camper conversion. And that's going to be the removal of all the ambulance-y stuff. And in our case, we opted to go with the option of gutting everything out of the back of the rig. And that is pretty intimidating. As a matter of fact, if you don't know what you're looking at and who's really familiar with the inner wiring workings of an ambulance, nobody that I'm aware of, although anybody who's done one of these conversions is a lot more intimately familiar with it than those who haven't. Now, the advice that I would offer you is to really do a deep dive and figure out what exactly it is that you're removing. And in our case, we terminated all the wires at the control panel first and started just removing stuff from that point backwards. None of that's really needed except for a few things, a few circuits, like for instance the relays that handle your brake lights and all the running lights around the vehicle. Now I'm going to be able to correct those because those aren't working on my rig right now. I've got to go ahead and fix that. The brake lights on the chassis are working, but not the ones on the back of the box. I'm going to end up using relays because that's what they used with the Ambo, only I didn't know that at that time. So my recommendation would be to really familiarize yourself with what you're removing. And that's hard to do, and that's a lot easier said than done. The reason for that is basically because everything's grouped together in bundles of wires, and those wires are held together by zip ties, and they're running through channels, and when I say there's a bunch of wires, there's more wire than you'll probably ever see in any vehicle you'll ever deal with, ever. So to us, it was easier just to go ahead and remove all of that. And in all honesty, knowing what I know now, it's a little bit simpler than it looks initially. It's completely overwhelming the first time you look at it, especially when you look at the wiring harness that's integrated into the headliner, or rather the ceiling of the wheel coach chassis. And all of them are pretty much modular like that. All the wires for the whole rig run across the ceiling, and then they spread out from there. Not a big deal, but that's the way we chose to do it. I would really do some soul searching with the intentions of what you want to use your camper for, and kind of figure out whether you really want to do the full gut out, or if you want to do what my wife and I kind of refer to as what we call a throw pillow conversion, where you basically take an Ambo and you can create a bed out of the bench that's already there. You use all the original cabinets that are in the rig. You basically just doll up what's already there. And there's nothing wrong with that. Matter of fact, it would be so much easier and we would have been on the road way before what we're ever going to see here at this point. But the fact of the matter is, for 2 adults and 2 dogs, we needed all the room we can get. Gutting it seemed like the viable option at the time, and that's what we ended up doing. Now, if you can make it work without having to do all that, man, it's a whole lot easier, and there's just so much that you do not have to mess with. And I would recommend that if you're timid about the wiring and you're just looking for an inexpensive camper, or maybe it's just you in the camper and it's nobody else, so you can get away with a lot less space requirements. At this point in the build, we had removed one wall and we were just starting to see what was ahead of us in terms of some of the wires that were becoming exposed. After that, we removed part of the ceiling, or at least the ceiling that came with it, and we could really get a grip on how many wires there really were and how they ran. For the most part, they all ran down the center of the ceiling assembly, and then they all plugged into the control panel, which was kind of mounted up towards the front of the vehicle and the bulkhead between the cab and then also the cabin. And my advice is to remove all of the ceiling, leave the wiring, and then start unplugging it from the control panel. And then that way you've got a better chance at figuring out what is what, and you can actually see your wiring and figure out where it plugs in. And like I said, you just might have a better chance at figuring out exactly where it goes, what you want to keep, and what you want to get rid of. Anxiety levels were now going steadily down as we could see a little bit of hope, and we were starting to see just kind of the raw ambulance box. And folks, this was a sight for sore eyes, because until this point, it was just a lot of static noise with thousands of wires hanging around that we had no idea where they went. And we didn't even know if we had made the right choice at that point. All we knew at this point was things were looking a whole lot better. After what felt like decades of gutting this ambulance out, my wife and I were so ready to make some progress, some forward momentum. And we ended up deciding to build our bed platform first. And folks, my big recommendation here, biggest tip I could offer you, is don't do that. Don't do what we did and build the bed platform first. The fact of the matter is, it's very gratifying. We ended up with a queen size mattress in ours. And you know what? It's probably the biggest single item that's sitting here in the camper. But the problem is it is huge and it's going to get in your way. So my advice to you is to go ahead, and if you're going to do the camper conversion in an ambulance, build your bed platform, be proud of the bed platform, but do it at a later point. At minimum, at absolute minimum, go ahead and replace your floor first and install your ceiling, whatever that ceiling might be. Do both of those items first. Now, you could put a floor down with a bed platform in place, and that's exactly what we did, but it was in the way. And when we put our ceiling in, also in the way. Not insurmountable. My wife's a lot smaller than I am, so she was able to get up on the bed platform and do a lot of the sanding overhead on the ceiling that had to be done at that point in time. But would I recommend it that way? Absolutely not. So regrets regarding the bed platform? No, not really. The only regret I've got is building it first. We were just in a mental state of having to see some forward momentum. After what felt like weeks of removing wires and furniture out of the back of this thing, we needed the win. The win felt good, but only until we realized what we had caused ourselves in terms of additional work and just one humongous item that we had to work around. Also, when we're talking about regrets on things or things maybe I would have done different, the front beam on the front of the bed is what we used because we needed some substantial support up there, since the rest of the platform was going to be constructed out of 2x4s. And it also just happened to be what I had laying around at the time. And I believe the beam is a 2x10. And it looks great. As a matter of fact, it was the first thing that actually had a finished appearance to it inside the camper, because we had stained it just to kind of see what it would look like. And at that point in time, it was really the best looking thing inside here. And you want to talk about a mental win that was needed, that was definitely it. Now, the width of it, however, has proven to be a little bit of a challenge, and it's something we could overcome just by doing some trimming work. But the challenge is that's where we keep our IceCo cooler, is right underneath of the bed. And there's probably about a 1/2 inch of tolerance between the roof of the cooler and the bottom portion of that beam. So if I'd have done anything different on that, it might have been used maybe a 2x8 rather than the 2x10, just to offer a little bit bigger gap between the cooler and the bed platform. But again, these are little items, not a big deal at all. But hey, you know what? It is what it is.
The single board you see right there was the basis of the entire bed platform. This was the beginning of pretty much the construction process for the rig. Following that, we basically framed the rest of it out of 2x4 lumber, and we just leveled it off with the rear cabinets, as you can kind of see right there, that we had cut down in order to make accommodations for a queen-size bed. So following the framework, we simply topped everything off with a piece of 1/2-inch plywood, and there you go, we have a bed platform.
Regarding the MaxxAir fan, things I might do different. Well, not really. Not really anything profound. We mounted ours right dead center in the middle of the box. It seemed like the good place to put it. After all, it was going to be pretty much directly above where or not directly above in the center, but kind of directly above where the stove is going to be. We figured that's going to be good for ventilating boiling water or any foods that are getting a little bit funky inside the camper. At least we can go ahead and blast them out of there. In hindsight, though, I might go ahead and do it different by putting that fan all the way at the back of the rig, kind of over where the bed's at. That way, one, while we're sleeping, I'm real big about having a fan moving air while I'm sleeping, and it feels like that would have been a little bit more benefit back there for that. But also the fact that you've got a bigger field to pull from. So if you crack the windows in the front of the vehicle and you've got the fan all the way at the back of it, it's going to draw air all the way from the front to the back, and it's just going to provide a little bit of a nicer cross breeze. The windows in the back of our rig, they don't open, and that might be something we upgrade later and replace the stationary glass windows back there with glass that slides open and closed. It just kind of depends. Depends on my motivation level. For that matter, we've got a cabin to get into when this is done, so I don't really know that that's going to happen, but that would be something I might look at doing different with the MaxxAir fan anyway.
So what you've got here is me on top of the camper with a Sawzall cutting a 14-inch by 14-inch hole. This was a lot of anxiety on this because, well, it's a 14 by 14-inch hole in the top of a camper for one, but also I had to cut through a structural brace, and I didn't really know for sure how that was going to pan out. Luckily, our measuring paid off because the hole was fine and the fan fit the hole just fine. The structural brace was not an issue, and although at this point this fan was plugged up to a 12-volt jump box, it was actually the first electrical appliance that we had installed in the camper, and that gave us a pretty good feeling of accomplishment just to see something actually working that we had installed.
The installation was kind of a tedious job, not really difficult, just really time consuming. We hadn't really ever dealt with this foam board before. We really had no idea how to cut this stuff, so we started off with a box blade. And I can tell you right now that the box blade is futile. You're going to waste a lot of razors. It dulls them super quick, really difficult. You've got to put a lot of effort into pulling that blade through the foam, not to mention dangerous because it one slip and you could really hurt yourself. Now, what I would suggest is absolutely use the foam board because it's dimensional and pretty much everything in the camper is square. What I would recommend highly, what we ended up using just because we had it at the time, was a jigsaw. It is not the method, however, that I would suggest. I would suggest if you have access to a table saw, or for that matter, if you're really doing a gut-out camper conversion, go buy a table saw. It doesn't have to be a super expensive one. We ended up buying a table saw later, not for that project, but for others. That's really the only advice I would offer regarding the insulation, short of maybe just, planning out where you plan on running wires, where you're going to run your 110 outlets to, and make accommodations for that before you start stuffing insulation in walls.
So here's what it started looking like after the insulation was up. And it wasn't 100% up at this point, but it was making us feel really good just because the way it was looking was fantastic. Like I said, we weren't complete yet, but the bump in spirits, it was definitely present just because, man, how good does that look?
We opted to go ahead and replace the wheeled coach scene lights on the side of the vehicle. The problem with them was they broadcast light everywhere. We ended up going with some angled LED lights that angled the light down. And before I go too much further, what the scene lights are is on this particular rig, there was 2 in the back, 2 on the left side, 2 on the right side. And they all just basically, when you're on the scene of an emergency, they turn these scene lights on to illuminate everything. They don't always have street lights, folks. They have to light the scene up themselves, and that's what those do really, really good at. The problem with those was they, like I said, they broadcast light straight out. So your neighbors at a campsite, they may not be quite as thrilled about the bright light as you are. Hence the getting rid of the factory ones and replacing them with smaller, more efficient LED versions like we did. And they are every bit as bright. As a matter of fact, I'm shocked at how bright these little dudes really are. And they're really not too expensive. Matter of fact, just like about everything on this build, we got them on Amazon, and I believe we bought a multi-pack of them, and they're not bad. They're not bad in price. The only thing I would really recommend doing different, and I did it the way I did it because I'm cheap, but on the scene lights, when you take them out, the opening is probably about this big. I want to say it's probably 9 inches by about 6 inches if I had to guess. So the scene lights that we purchased, the little LED lights, they're nowhere near that big. So I had to make a filler plate in order to mount the little LED lights on. And the filler plates, I wanted to use aluminum because that's what the rest of the box is, and I didn't want to put steel on aluminum. We all know that's bad. And what I ended up using were pieces of the interior metal cabinets that I cut out of this thing in order to free up more space. But I had to make a lot of them, and it was really, really time consuming. It's not something you could do on a table saw. If I had a bandsaw, that might have simplified things, but what I had was a jigsaw, and that's what I used. The only recommendation really that I would make is if you have somebody who can cut those things for you, that maybe has a water jet or just some piece of industrial equipment that can cut them easier, faster, straighter. And the drawback to that is it's not going to be cheaper. It's going to cost you money. So if you've got the time, do it like I did. But don't expect perfection, because I don't care how steady your hand is when you're cutting 1/8 of an inch thick aluminum. It's not going to be perfect, but nothing about this build's perfect, so we're okay there. Each scene light was mounted on a little piece of metal that I'd cut myself, and I just centered the lights in those panels, drilled the holes, and then we were able to go ahead and get those mounted in the same factory holes that Wheel Coach had put up there for their scene lights. As you could kind of see, the lights in the shop were off here at this point, and they did make a heck of a presence. The ceiling. Yes, the ceiling. Well, I do have some suggestions regarding that. And this is just all personal preference, of course, but the first one I'd say is the ceiling is going to be a huge impact in the way that your conversion looks. This isn't a super, super tall camper. It's not like a big fifth wheel where when the doors open, you're looking straight up into it, but you are looking up into it. And one of the first things people are going to see when they look into your camper is going to be your ceiling. And there is a ton of different options. There's sheet board. You know, you could buy beadboard, for instance. You could use plywood. You could use laminate board. You could use PVC panels, just whatever your heart desires. And it all comes down to what you want it to look like. We wanted ours to look phenomenal. We wanted it to look like a centerpiece. We wanted to make the camper look like a little cabin on wheels. So what we opted to use was tongue and groove pine board. Now, as much as I really wanted to go with cedar, I just could not justify the price difference between the cedar and the pine. You've seen the photos, make up your own mind, but I think it looks phenomenal, and for the price, there's just no comparison. You're going to spend 2 to 3 times the amount for cedar, and we just didn't see the value in that. Other than taking your time and choosing carefully for your ceiling, the biggest suggestion I would make to you, the biggest recommendation that I would make to you, is to prep your boards before they go on your ceiling. And I'm not even talking about staining them. Now, you can do that too if that's what you choose to do. But at absolute minimum, do this on a sawhorse, but do all your sanding on a sawhorse. Do all your prep on a sawhorse. The holes that you plan on drilling, fit it to the ceiling, mark your holes, do that on a sawhorse rather than doing it overhead. We did not. Well, I did drill the holes, not on a sawhorse, but down here on the floor of the camper. But we did all the sanding overhead, and we did all the staining and all the clear coating overhead. And once again, this goes back to that queen size bed platform being smack dab in the middle of everything we were trying to do. My wife's a lot smaller stature than I am compared to me. She is tiny, and she was able to do a lot of the work by getting up on the bed platform herself. But you're on your knees up there. It's a hard surface. It's not comfortable. Going back to that whole thing, and I can't stress it enough, folks, don't build your bed platform first like we did. If you're going to learn anything off of this channel, I like to think that you'll take a lot of cool things away from it in terms of the value of how to do things. But folks, what I could offer you in the way not to do things is a whole lot more valuable than what I could tell you about how to do them right.
Now, the best single piece of advice that a guy could offer is going to be to mount your first board on the ceiling, measure it 100 times before you put it into place. Every single board comes right off of that, so if you've got it even a little bit out of place, the rest of the boards are going to follow. These are the little LED lights that we chose to use to illuminate the inside of the camper. Two reasons we use those. One, they look great. Two, energy efficiency. The installation of the ceiling is pretty rewarding because the boards themselves are pretty good sized, and when they're going up, they actually make a pretty fast impact, and you can see your project coming together pretty quick. And once we had to take them up and down several times in order to pre-drill the holes and go ahead and get them put into place. But as you can see, it really did come out nice. What we've got here is my wife doing some overhead sanding, and this is kind of one of those tips that I'd tell you to go ahead and do your sanding work on a sawhorse down on the ground. We were so anxious probably in order to see results that we went ahead and we placed all the boards up on the ceiling first. Not a method I would recommend. It did work and it does look phenomenal, but you're going to save yourself a lot of backaches by going ahead and doing all the prep work on sawhorses, if at all possible. Now, the staining work, I would love to tell you it's better to go ahead and do that on sawhorses as well. But truthfully, I don't know that that's going to be the answer. I think staining it up on the ceiling, or at least in my opinion, was probably the way to go. You can see the end result here after the staining was complete and no clear, and it looks good. But man, after the clear coat was added, it was jaw-dropping. I mean, we were so excited to see something that looked like this. We knew our efforts definitely went the right direction, and even though it was so cold when we did our clear coat work, it came out fantastic.
Regarding the shower, really do some soul searching on this because the shower takes up a pretty good size footprint in a very, very small camper conversion. When you're talking about an ambulance camper conversion, once again, 8 foot by 14, a decent sized shower might be 2 foot by 3 foot if you're a little bitty. We ended up going a little bit bigger than that because we chose to put our Airhead Tahoe composting toilet in the same room as our shower pan. Do some soul searching and figure out if the shower is really something that you want to do. Now, in the terms of our wants on our camper, we wanted a queen size bed, we wanted a dinette, and I really wanted a restroom and a shower, and the rest I would figure it out. Those three things were non-negotiable, but looking back on it, you know what? The outdoor shower might be a viable option. If it's really so hot outside that I'm going to be that funky and need a shower, it's just possible maybe I should have done it outside rather than hog up this much interior room. But there's no denying the shower looks phenomenal with the cottage planks we used on the outside and the size of it on the inside. When you look at other campers that are the size of this thing, so what we're really talking about would be like little bumper pole campers, and those have the wet baths in them where you've actually got to cover up your toilet paper because it's so close to the shower head that it's going to get wet if you don't. When you compare it to something like that, it's fairly impressive. Folks walk in here and they look at the amenities that it does have. Like I said, the queen size bed, the shower, and the table. That's all pretty impressive considering the dinky size of this thing. It's all up to you. It's all about your personal preference and how you plan on using it. When we use this in order to live in while we're out building out our off-grid property, well, the shower, it'll probably come in handy. On the other hand, like I said, an outdoor shower, it might do the same trick for you. So something to consider. Make up your own mind about that. A couple other things you want to consider when you add a shower to your build is the complexity of the plumbing. And in this vehicle, it was a little bit tricky because I had to build out the infrastructure, right? I had to put the bed in, I needed to put my shower in, the dinette table, I had to have a sink. The sink's got to drain somewhere, and unless you run multiple gray tanks, it's draining to the same place that the shower's going to drain to. So it adds a level of complexity that you just need to be prepared for. It's not insurmountable. It just requires, in my case, many trips to the hardware store, a lot of cussing, sometimes a mad wife, but ultimately I got the job done. The other thing is just kind of the versatility. If we ever go to get rid of this thing, it is fairly impressive that it has what it has. So I feel like we made the right choice, at least at this point. I feel like that. I'll check back with you in about a year when we do a review after we've been using it for quite some time. And this list might look quite a bit different then, but at this point, I think we did okay. I think we made the right choice. So regrets, you know what, like I said, it does sacrifice some room that could have been used for other valuable things like a closet, which we don't really have here. But we're going to be backpacking it while we use this for the most part.
At this point, we didn't know exactly how we were going to frame the shower out, but we had a pretty rough idea. I simply started by laying some 2x4s on the ground and getting a rough idea of the general size that we wanted to go with, and then I just began framing up from there. You can see me at 6'2". I do fit on that side of the camper, which was pretty impressive considering that the roof does taper down over on that side, but that's how things got started. We used a cottage plank that we had purchased from Lowe's in order to start laying on the outside of the framework. And it didn't take too long by using that, and we realized that that was probably the best choice we could have made. The end result, looking at the exterior, it's hard to deny that it came together absolutely fantastic. As with all projects on the camper, it's quite important that they are Good Boy approved, and looking at these good boys, it's pretty obvious that they were. To begin with, we weren't exactly sure how we were going to fit our composting toilet into this little space, but this is the first attempt, and ultimately it's pretty much the bones of how we did it. The shower pan, we ended up framing the inside of the space in order to match the shower pan general size, and it really did come out looking pretty good as well. The inside on the walls, we used a compilation of things. We used 3/4 inch plywood, 1/4 inch plywood, and just a compilation of studding in order to get everything furred out to where it needed to go. The green substance you see on the walls here is it's a product called Aqua Defense, and it's a rubbery membrane that you brush or you could roll on, and what that does is just waterproofs the inside of your shower enclosure. Here was another pivotal moment in terms of anxiety here, folks. This is the biggest hole saw I've ever used in my life. But in order to go ahead and put the little Max Air side vent fan into the camper, we had to drill a massive 6 1/4 inch hole into the sidewall, through layers of plywood, and then ultimately through the exterior skin of the camper. All in all, though, the installation really wasn't all that difficult. If you take the drilling the hole out of the side of the camper into, not into, but if you take that out of the equation, it was a pretty simple install, and it did end up coming out pretty functional, and it actually looks really good.
So regarding the floor, the only piece of advice I'd give you is really much the same as I gave you on the ceiling. And that is choose what you want. It's going to be a big focal point. When we first did ours, I found some boards that I thought looked pretty good, or at least they looked good in the store. And my wife really, really wanted the floor that we actually ended up using here. But what I was worried about was the thickness of the planks. I wanted to get the thinnest stuff I could because I wanted to leave myself enough headroom so I'm not constantly injuring myself while walking around in the inside of the camper. Now, we brought the planks home that I chose, or more or less I chose. She compromised and accepted it, and she said she was good with it, even though that she wasn't. We ended up bringing those home, laid about 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces down on the ground, and it was awful. I knew immediately I had screwed up and that we were going to have to do something and go back to the store and buy the stuff that she chose like immediately because this wasn't going to work. The whole rig here is about 100 square feet, give or take. And by the time you take out the footprint of things that you really don't need floor under, like your kitchen cabinet, for instance, and even in our case, we probably could have gotten away with not putting it under the bed platform, but we wanted the pretty, so we ended up doing that. But with all the interior cabinets that the ambulances have, if you don't remove them, you build around those. My whole point with that little rant is that 100 square feet is like the absolute maximum, and you're not going to have that. I think by the time we got done, we're probably closer to 50 square feet of board to put down on the floor. That's really not that big of a deal, so buy the expensive stuff. Make your camper look good, guys. You don't have to buy that much of it. That's my advice to you.
Now, the floor installation, well, it was pretty much laminate floor installation. There really wasn't a whole lot to be said about it. The product we ended up choosing, we feel like it is the best one that we could have gone with, and it was my wife's first choice and my second choice, but as usual, she was right, and this stuff came out looking phenomenal. Now, it did go down so fast that I was not able to go ahead and shoot a lot of content on it just because it really didn't take long at all to put into place. Now, we've got to go back in and put the edging strips in and just do some basic trim out, but voila, there it is.
This isn't so much an issue with like say an F series pickup that's an ambulance because you don't really have a bulkhead. And when I say the word bulkhead, what I mean is this big thing right here. And when we did the disassembly on the interior, all this was gone. So it was like wide open to the cab of the van. And a lot of people like that. A lot of folks will want to go ahead and make those front seats to where they swivel around and you could use those for interior seating. And man, that really is cool. It does look good. The problem is I don't know how functional it would be in this particular vehicle because this little area right here is so low. Also, underneath of the driver's side seat, there's some battery cables that come up through the floor. So I don't know that you really want to have moving metal swiveling around the top of that. It just seems like a my first welding kit just kind of waiting to happen, and I wasn't going to do that. Not to mention those brackets are about $300 or $400, and I just didn't really see that we were going to use it that much. Personally, I like the privacy of having this, and we're going to end up having like a sliding door, like a barn door that goes back and forth here in order to keep our privacy. We chose to go with the bulkhead. It is a selection that you have to make for yourself, whether you leave this open or closed. One of the big reasons that we decided to go ahead and put it in here was one, it was privacy. We wanted our privacy. But two, it offers another wall here to do things with. And in our case, initially, I was thinking additional kitchen cabinets. And that was actually before I had the epiphany while looking at it, like, oh my gosh, we could actually fit the dinette in there. Now, granted, it's a two-person dinette. It's not huge, but it's still a place like I'm doing right now to sit and drink my coffee or eat my breakfast or play a game of cards or Connect Four or whatever you want to do. So having the additional wall space here was pretty important to us. That's why we ended up choosing to go ahead and build out this bulkhead, and it also gave us a place to display this really banging looking cottage plank selection here that my wife chose for us.
Now, the one thing I knew about the bulkhead is that I wanted it to be super strong. And we were able to achieve that by using a 3/4 inch plywood board. And it's all screwed together in construction. And I even went as far as to use a pocket hole jig to go ahead and drill holes through the bottom of the 3/4 inch plywood to anchor it down to the floor. I wanted it to be able to take a pretty good sized bump either by a doggo or by ourselves and still maintain, be a strong foundation, and it gave us an area to go ahead and continue that cottage plank siding that was used on the bathroom and continue that across the front of the space. It came out great.
So having the bulkhead here was definitely pretty cool. And the reason for that is in our case, we decided to go ahead and put our dinette here. And the dinette offers a few different things for versatility. The first, it's a dinette. It gives you a table to eat at, or drink at, or play games at, or just whatever. The other thing is this table slides all the way down, and this turns into a bench. So where basically we've got a couch which will comfortably absolutely sit two people, maybe even three people if y'all are friends. The next benefit that having the dinette offers is the little bench that I'm sitting on right now has storage underneath of it. And in this particular build, storage is an asset. You want all of it that you can get your hands on, and it does offer that. Now, it's not a ton of storage, but you could put blankets under there, pillows, or whatever you could fit in there. That's up to you. The other side has a bench top that comes off, and what I keep underneath of there are my two big 24-volt solar batteries. They don't really need constant access, but I do need access to them in case either one, I upgrade the system, or two, I need to fix something, or maintenance, or just whatever. And there is a little bit of room in there as well for storage, but it also gives me a place to run my heating duct because my diesel heater's out here on the side inside of an exterior cabinet, and the duct comes in here and runs onto the interior. Having that little duct running through the battery box also kind of works twofold to keep those batteries warm in the cold weather. Now the bench that results when you drop this tabletop down is actually pretty neat too, because you could throw the cushions on there and you can get a small person on there and actually use this as a bed. Now granted, it may not be the most comfortable bed you've ever laid your head on, but I'm 6'2" and I could almost fit in it. As a matter of fact, I can fit on it, but I would have to have some pillows kind of piled up on one end to put my head on it, and it wouldn't be super comfortable for me. My wife, however, like I said, she's tiny. She'd fit on this just fine. For that matter, any of my grandkids would fit on this perfectly. Not a big deal. So having that extra spot to sleep in a camper that's this small, that's an asset too. So definitely a plus in my books. Now, the drawbacks of having the dinette here really, and this again, once again, it comes all down to your expectations and your priorities, is it does take up a footprint that could be used for something else. Initially, we were going to put the shower on the front side of this, and in hindsight, I kind of wonder what that would have looked like if we'd have done that and maybe put the dinette on the side, but that's hindsight's always 20/20, and maybe I'll do that on the next build, if there is a next build. If nothing else, at least I could offer that to you, and it's something to consider for yours. But regrets? Nah, I think we did pretty good on this one.
I started off by using 2x4s and just basically built a bench structure in order to construct the plywood over top of. And we went ahead and went a step further. We found some paint that was on sale at Lowe's. That way, when I open the bench and I look into it, I actually have something nice to look at rather than just raw wood. I've never been a fan of just raw wood. Here, I was just basically using a 1/4 inch fascia board to go ahead and secure to the outside of that framework. And that acted just to go ahead and close things out. And like I said, just create a little bit of storage underneath of these benches. The storage was great to have. And in our case, we used it for our solar batteries. And we did that on the smaller side of the bench. It really comes in handy. Every square inch counts. There's just no doubt about that. My wife went ahead and ran a sander across the exterior surfaces before we went ahead and we primed these and got them ready for paint. In this photo, you could see kind of the center section that we put down here as well, and you could really just overall, the reason I showed this was to show what the bench was going to look like, more or less in its completed form. It's not only going to be a dinette table, but it's also going to be a bench, a bed, and just whatever we need it to be. You can see in its final form with the pedestal underneath of it how remarkable this thing really does look. The versatility of it is really just awesome. The fact we could use it for a dinette, a bench, or a bed, man, that was perfect. It worked out exactly like what we were hoping for.
You can see in this photo the right side bench, or at least the larger of the two benches. We've got a little bit of storage, and I lined the inside of that cabinet with, I believe it was a 1/4 inch plywood, and just ran a clear polyurethane clear over it just to make it a little bit more pretty. Okay, so here's the question. Should a camper have a headboard? Well, if you ask my wife, absolutely. Hands down, there's no question about it. Personally, I thought it was a little bit silly when the idea first came about. I didn't see the value in it really until my wife made me build it. I could have chosen not to. I could have also chosen to sleep on this little bench over here too, but to keep the peace and to make her happy, I went ahead and I built this headboard on the end of our bed. And it didn't take very long of stacking boards up before I realized that, man, my wife's a genius. This looks amazing, and it really does add a dimensional look to it that wallboard is not going to add. So it also gives us a place to put a little shelf right above it, and it really came out looking good. As a matter of fact, I had to go ahead and frame out the wall a little bit, but the board went up really easy. I didn't have a lot of content regarding the headboard because it really did go up so easy. There wasn't time to shoot the content. I just kind of have the before, a couple of photos during, and then the after, of course. But do I have regrets on that? No. You know what? Now, kind of looking at it, maybe I should listen to my wife more. You know what? We'll talk about that later. Now, one thing I will say about the headboard in terms of just advice, right? When you do this, go ahead and build out both sides of where those boards are going to be cut. So what I mean by that is you've got a wall here, and then you've got the board that butts up flush against each one. I didn't do that. Initially, I had the wall on basically the rear side of the restroom, and then over here there was no wall yet because we just hadn't cased that wall in. What we ended up using was plywood, but you could use whatever. So what I ended up doing is the board was already up and it was already cut, and I was basically, the wall was here and I was going to have to push the wall board up like this, and it just wasn't going to look really aesthetically pleasing at all. So what I ended up doing is I made the purchase of a toy that I've wanted for a while but really have not had a whole lot of reason to have it, which is an oscillating multi-tool. And folks, if you don't have one of these, or if you don't think it'd be something that you would use, I would wage an argument on that, because you will. And it is definitely worth the money. I was able to go ahead and basically cut about, a 1/2 inch off the end of those boards and then slide that wall board right behind it, and it made it look so much better. Now the downside to that is there's just no way for me to cut it with an oscillating multi-tool as straight as I could with a skill saw on the other side. So unfortunately, one side's a little bit ragged looking compared to the other. But if you're really staring at it that hard, man, get out of my bed and quit staring at my headboard. The wall issue, though, that's really about the only regret that I've got on that. And my tip to you would be to build your walls before you throw your headboard in there. And just try to plan ahead as much as possible. And planning ahead seems like something that's just common sense, but when you're building a complete RV out of a metal box that doesn't have anything in it, you're responsible for wiring, you're responsible for studs, ventilation, air conditioning, heating, ceilings, floor, doors, doorknobs, windows, everything. So you could think ahead all you want, but I promise you're going to miss stuff. And that's why I wanted to make this video, is to throw out some of this stuff to you, because it's just not things you think about until you stand there and you're looking at your mess up. Point being, I hope what I'm doing here is offering some kind of value, maybe not just this issue about the headboard, but kind of the whole video. The wall on the left side, the one that's covered in insulation with the plywood, that is where we put our headboard, and it's hard to see in this, but that's where the queen-size bed platform resides. Really, the toughest part was to get those 2x4s attached to the metal studs that were on the wall behind it, but once I had pre-drilled into the 2x4s, it really wasn't too bad. You could kind of look at this and tell, though, that we definitely made the right choice with the beadboard. We used the same stuff that we used on the ceiling. And on this side, you can see where it mounts flush up against the wall. And unfortunately, on the other side, unfortunately, that's where I had to hit that thing with the oscillating tool. And it doesn't look near as pretty since I cut this after after the fact. That wall should have gone up first, but it didn't. And you can see where I boogered up the wall right there, but I'm going to run a little bit of stain over that and it won't look so bad. Anyway, a little bit of stain applied, and once again, my wife was on the task of doing that, and it came out phenomenal. As a matter of fact, it matches the sheen and overall appearance of the ceiling. Anyway, the only regret I have is probably not listening to the wife sooner. So the cabinets in this thing, that was kind of an ordeal. Initially, I started building the kitchen cabinet first, and I had no doubts that it was not going to be a pretty looking cabinet because my skills when it comes to building basic boxes out of plywood, they're not great. And it was even further limited because all I had was a skill saw. I didn't have a table saw. And my first attempt, I didn't show pictures of it because I was pretty downhearted over it. It looked terrible. Matter of fact, there was brief moments where I was thinking about scrapping the whole project over that kitchen cabinet. And ultimately, I ended up making the decision to go ahead and purchase a table saw. And woodworking is something I've always kind of wanted to dabble in, but having been more into custom cars, you know, oil and sawdust don't mix too well, so I've just never really purchased a lot of that equipment. Now I have, though, and I was able to actually make some pretty decent looking cabinets. Considering that this guy's never built a cabinet a day in my life, they came out pretty good. As a matter of fact, I'm rather proud of myself, and if there's any professional cabinet makers out there, you could hate on it all you want, but if you took a look at my first one I built and then looked at these, I think you're going to find, at least in comparison, that what I've got on here now looks tenfold better than what I built to begin with. My only regret on the cabinets is, one, I couldn't fit more in here, and we got a lot in here. We've got the kitchen cabinet, we've got a cabinet that goes over my head here right now. We've taken them down temporarily to go ahead and paint those. But there's one over top of the kitchen, and then there's another one back there over the headboard. The only thing I haven't done at this point are cabinet doors, but in the effort to get this thing moving a little bit quicker, we decided to go ahead and paint those. And what we might use anyway, at least to keep clothes and articles like that, are just like a bungee net for the time being. Now later, that might be something that's kind of a side project, is to go ahead and do those cabinet doors. I know I said I didn't want to walk away from it, but those I think are going to be a little bit more complex than the cabinet bases, and I know I can do them, but I also know it's going to take me a little while to get it done too. Regrets wise though, other than just not being able to have more cabinets, and that's really a spatial issue, not necessarily a skill issue, is the countertop that I chose to use is basically, it's a big thick piece of wood. Matter of fact, it's a countertop type of wood that we purchased at Lowe's. This is the same stuff that's over here on my kitchen cabinet, and I think it's about 1.5 inches thick. And honestly, we wanted the two to match, so we bought 2 pieces of it down at the hardware store, sanded it down, kind of rounded the edges off to look a little rustic. We didn't use a router for that reason. We wanted just a little bit of rustic to it. The problem is the wood is pretty soft. I don't really know for sure what kind of wood this is, but at this point I've sat on this, I've dropped a couple screwdrivers on this, and there's little divots in the wood here and there, mainly on the bench, not so much the kitchen cabinet. But you know, the kitchen cabinet's going to be a high use area, and it's probably going to get a little bit tattered up. I guess at the end of the day, it's a very small cabinet, so if it's got a couple battle wounds, then it is what it is. The other options would have been having maybe a piece of stone custom cut, but that's going to come with a pretty hefty expense. And for what we're doing here, folks, I just didn't see the need to do that. Matter of fact, one of the reasons that we decided to build this camper was to keep our costs down. We wanted to put the money where it was going to matter, like the ceiling, like the floor, the countertops, for what we're using those for. They're more utilitarian than anything, and that's how we built it. This was kind of the humble beginnings of the cabinets, and this was actually the dinette cabinet.
Once again, folks, I never had any experience in building a cabinet, not once, not a day in my life. Now, overall, I think I did pretty good with it. I certainly could have improved in several areas, and moving forward in the future, I probably will. But overall, I think you could agree that for at least a first time effort, it didn't come out all that bad. Matter of fact, I'm actually quite proud of the way it came out, all things considered. Everything was kind of a first time for me, including these cabinet faces. And the one thing I could tell you is that you cannot have enough clamps. Matter of fact, I probably acquired almost every clamp that I own here at this point after building these cabinets because I just kept running into more and more instances that I was going to need these. Here is kind of a mock-up of the cabinet in its almost finished form. It's got the countertop, it's got the gas stove, and it's also got the sink that we chose to use. And we were feeling pretty doggone good right now. My wife went ahead and did go ahead and move forward with the stain on the surface, and you could kind of see it sitting in the campulence there. It did come together looking quite nice. It doesn't match that beam perfectly because it is a different kind of wood, but overall, we love the contrast. The overhead cabinets were much the same construction method. Not really a whole lot changed as far as that goes. We simply built them, put them into position, and every cabinet that we built, we tried our best to make it at least similar in design nature, which could be seen when you kind of see them up on the wall and you compare them to them side by side. Like for instance here, the cabinet on the right has the same basic appearance as the cabinet on the far wall over there. And also to be said, in these photos, you could really see how the overall design is coming together in this camper. Folks, we couldn't be more pleased with it. So to show you the photos in this fast of a motion is a radical understatement of the amount of effort it really did take to do it, but we're proud of it.
Early in the camper build, I had decided to use the Vellet 24 volt DC air conditioner. And the reason I did was because you could store it underneath of a bench. At least that's the way they market it anyway, is that, you can kind of rat hole it under a bed or under a bench. And given our limited roof space, because we wanted the solar panels up there, I wanted a fan up there also. So a fan and an air conditioning unit likely were not going to fit very well. So we ended up going with the Vellet. I have a video where I tested that thing, and it was probably the hottest day of last year. It was mid-July, I don't remember the day, but it was so hot outside, folks. It definitely got over 100 degrees, not the heat index. It was over 100 degrees, and it was miserable that day. It was an acid test of the air conditioner, but you have to keep in mind, I don't have any coverings over the windows. There's no ceramic tint. I didn't have my solar panels on the roof either. And the heat gain that transfers through the windshield and this big opening right here, that had to be taken into account for as well. The Vellet still did pretty well, and I have no doubts that at night it would do great, but I do have my doubts of whether or not it's going to keep up when it is literally 100 degrees outside. I want to say when it was 101, we got it down to somewhere around 81 in here. And it's a little concerning because we've got two English bulldogs that are going to be in here during those situations, at least until our off-grid cabin gets built out enough to where we've got an air conditioner unit in that. So it is a little bit of a concern, and 81, although is a little bit warm, it's still livable, at least during the peak hours of the day. It's certainly going to feel a hell of a lot better than it's going to feel like when you're outside and it's 101, I can tell you that. Regret it? I don't know. I still wonder. A good friend of mine who's a YouTuber as well, he has a lot of things given to him, and he was given a OutEquip Pro 12 volt roof air conditioner to try out. And from what he tells me, I've not actually been in it, so I couldn't tell you firsthand, but from what he tells me, for a fraction of the cost of that Vellet, it does probably about the same thing. Now, those roof air conditioners are pretty cool in the fact that they're going to mount in the same size hole as that Max Air fan that I put inside this camper. So if it really comes right down to it, I could technically run two air conditioners. The drawback to that, the big drawback to that, is This thing doesn't plug into RV outlets. I mean, actually, it is equipped to, but when we're off grid, there are no outlets out there. So it's all going to have to be solar. And in order to run one air conditioner, it's a heavy enough lift for those batteries to power that for an overnight stay, much less two of them. So two might be during the peak hours of the day thing when the pups are in here. I don't know. Once again, after we've had this thing and we've been using it for a good year or so, I'm going to come back and do another review video and go over everything that we've done, my thoughts on it today compared to an after use kind of a perspective looking back on things. And we'll do that then. Do I regret it though, choosing the Velette? Yeah, a little bit, because the Velette was really on the top end of what an air conditioner could cost. Looking back at it, a mini split was in the cards. The only problem with that is where do you put the condenser unit? And we needed the ability to be able to run the air conditioner while we're running down the road, just because, like I said, we've got the dogs in here. And with the Velette, at least we can do that. So I'm really hoping that by the time I add my ceramic tint to the windows, and we've got about 80% of the roof now is covered with solar panels, so that will have to have an effect on it, I would certainly think. Just having the shade effect of those solar panels up just almost has to change things a little bit. I think it's going to end up working okay, but that's just going to be something we're going to have to look at in the future.
Despite this thing's igloo cooler appearance, it looks like it's made out of styrofoam, for instance, the unit is actually pretty effective. We've had pretty good luck with it in terms of its functionality. Hooking it up was a breeze. There are some reservations we've got about it, however. In terms of its ability to act like it should in extreme hot temperatures, which was the whole reason that we bought it, well, unfortunately, we do have our doubts. Moral of the story, folks, is not everything is going to be a home run. Sometimes you're going to make a poor choice when it comes to the equipment that you choose for your camper conversion. I don't know that I'm really ready to call this thing a poor choice in equipment yet, but like I said, we do have some reservations in terms of its functionality. The fact of the matter is when I tested this thing on a very, very hot day, as a matter of fact, it was probably the hottest day of 2024, it did okay. It lowered the temperature 20 degrees within the camper, and honestly, from what I understand, that's really not that bad of a deal. Not every day is going to be 110, and we've made some changes in the camper since then. Like I stated before, we've got the solar panels on the roof, and that's going to reduce the solar gain. But that day when I tested it, these here were the results. You could pause this and take a look. It pulled a ton of humidity out of the camper, but the temperatures, well, time will tell when it comes to that.
So the gray tank. Yeah, that's proven to be a challenge. And I had initially bought another style tank in order to hang underneath of this camper. And where I was going to put it was on the driver's side, between the frame rail and the drive shaft. There was a pretty good void right there. And that's where I was going to go ahead and put that gray tank at. And when I got under there and I looked at it, what I was locking up on was how am I going to do that? What am I going to mount it to? There's not really good areas to put it to, not without some serious fabrication work. And I just really under the ambulance in tight quarters. It's not like I've got a post lift here to lift this big beast up, not weighing over 10,000 pounds. And I decided to take another option, so I ordered a different tank, and that is what's hanging underneath of it right now. The problem with it, though, is it's shockingly close to the ground. It's probably 6 to 7 inches off the ground. Now, is that a problem? Probably not going down the highway. But where our property's at, there's some pretty rocky roads getting up to the side of the mountain that we're on. And that could prove to be a problem. Now, I've built it with the precautions to where the tank's capable of taking a pretty good jolt and without doing damage to the piping that goes to it. But if that ends up happening, I may have to step back and punt, go back to the drawing board, and we may have to go ahead and revert to using that original tank that I had purchased. Until that point though, the one that we've got, it looks good. It's got a nice gate valve on the side to dump the gray tank. I love everything about it other than the fact that it is a little bit too close to the ground. We're going to find out if that's an issue, and I'll have to report back on that as well. There may be a video coming in the near future about how to fix your gray tank on the side of the road. Hopefully that's not the case, but the reality of it is a real possibility, so it's just something I'm kind of getting ready for. It never hurts to plan.
So what we've got here is basically the rough location of where we decided to go ahead and put that tank at, and these are the brackets that I constructed to hold said tank kind of into place. They bolt to the bottom of the camper, and as you can see, there's not a whole lot of room between the floor and where the gray tank's going to go, and it gets even tighter looking once you actually get that gray tank into position. But it's functional, and I think going down the highway we should be in good shape. Time's going to tell on that, and ultimately, like I said before, this might be something that we have to go ahead and reverse course, step back and punt. But overall, I'm happy with the installation. The solidity of it, actually, I'm quite impressed with that.
Now, the plumbing of this thing, while not difficult, was definitely a challenge. None of it was really super hard though. It really, what the biggest challenge for me was, is wrapping my head around everything that needed to be done. For instance, the sink's over here on this side of the camper, and the gray tank is right over here underneath of the floor. So I had to figure out how to get the piping to go from here, over, down again into the gray tank. Then on top of that, I had to figure out how to join all that plumbing into the plumbing for the shower. Also, I had to figure out where to run all the PEX to go from the hot water heater over to the sink, over to the shower, and then of course, you know, there was the fresh water fill and then the city water connection as well. None of it was hard. It just required a lot of internet, and it required a lot of planning, and I can't even begin to tell you how many trips to Lowe's I ended up having to take in order to buy things that I didn't have, or if I had them, I didn't have enough of them. Now, that's not a big surprise. It seems like every project I end up doing, I end up having to make at least one trip to the hardware store for, but this was particularly crazy. Another factor that made it kind of tough was the vehicle doesn't sit perfectly straight like this. It goes down in the front. So everything's going downhill, and that's good. It's good for the fall of the water from the sink all the way to the gray tank. But not only did I have to take into account for the natural fall of the ambulance, when we go ahead and we take it to a campsite, we're probably going to raise the front end up just a little bit in order to level the box. That's not absolutely necessary, but it just makes things feel a little bit better while you're in the camper. That's why people have these self-leveling jacks for a multitude of reasons. That's just one of them. But even at that point, when the camper's level, there still has to be a certain amount of fall in the pipe, so the water's just going to sit there in your pipe. So that was a little bit of a challenge as well. Plumbing everything in is easy as that was physically. It was the planning process that really took most of the time. The hot water heater, that was another issue. You know what, I had made a bad purchase with a Country Mod water heater that I bought, and it didn't work. I ended up doing a lot of work and a lot of plumbing to get it set up, and you can go back and watch the video. It was a bad day in terms of mental health, I can tell you that much. But we ended up going with a Fugatti InstaShower 8, and that thing has worked flawlessly. And once again, in the future, when we go back and we do our review video after being able to use the camper for a while, we're going to go back and check all this stuff out and see what everything did, see how it worked, and see what broke and I had to fix. So, but that'll all be in the future. Regrets though doing it? No, not really. I can't say I have any regrets. And tips. The tips I would give to you are just do your homework, and if you're not a plumber and you don't just happen to have everything sitting around, be prepared, especially if you're using PEX. Some of these fittings come at a pretty fair price, and although like the crimp rings, the metal crimp rings, they're not that bad, you'd be shocked how many of them that you really are going to use. So budget for it and just plan ahead. That's all I can tell you.
So these are just some clips of the sections of plumbing that I ended up using, and what you're looking at here is right underneath of the shower. It's a P-trap that then goes over into the other line. And on this photo, you could see where that same line kind of goes through into our electrical cabinet and dips down to the gray tank. This is the drain line that comes off of the sink, sneaks under the bed platform, and then sneaks right underneath of where the toilet platform is. Here what we've got is where that same line kind of dips underneath of the toilet platform and then just disappears underneath of the shower platform. Here's another view of that with a little bit of PEX involved. Now, something I'll also say is I've not done a lot of plumbing in my life, so this was kind of a learning experience as well. There's really not a whole lot that a guy can't learn off of YouTube and just doing some basic research. And really it all just comes down to having the right products, a little bit of the right knowledge. Like I said, a little bit of YouTube University goes a long way. And for that matter, you could look up and see kind of what other people have done, and that's precisely what I did in order to go ahead and get the ideas in order to put all of this together. After all, this is an ambulance camper conversion, and there's been plenty of folks out there that have done more or less the same conversion, if not on an ambulance. It's probably been on either a schoolie or, maybe a cargo trailer conversion. But what I'm getting at is the knowledge is out there, and even if you really don't feel confident enough to do it yourself, watch some videos, do a little bit of learning, and you'd be surprised what you could pull off. Now, I'm not saying that you're not going to be able to, what am I trying to say? I'm not saying that you're not going to booger things up, because you're going to. And that's okay, because there's nothing that you can't really reverse and get fixed. So, folks, don't let any of this discourage you from trying, because at the end of it, that's how you're going to learn. And truly, once you build all this stuff for yourself, the great part about it is, and you're going to learn this, no matter what breaks, you're going to end up with the skill set to go back and fix it. I wanted to go ahead and show you the instant water heater that I installed in here, and this is something I was pretty proud of. Sometimes you got to get pretty creative in order to figure out where you're going to put certain products, and in this case what we did was we installed that on the back of the camper. On this case, we had to have a place to put our propane bottle, and what I did was use I'm not going to call it a worthless storage cabinet, because it's most certainly not worthless, but in terms of big product storage, it wasn't going to do a lot for us. The benefit of it was that it was a sealed compartment from the inside of the camper, and that's exactly what you want when it comes to propane. Now, on this day, folks, this was a pivotal moment. I was so happy with myself that I finally had not only running water, but hot, steamy, running water. Guys, we've been building up to this point for a long time, and to finally get this accomplished, to have not only the kitchenette installed, but to have that running water going, man, it really felt like we had, it felt like we had hit the jackpot.
The diesel heater, well, overall, it was a challenging installation. It took me 3 days in order to get everything in. The diesel heaters, they work great, but it's not just the small unit itself that you've got to contend with. You've got to deal with the exhaust pipe coming out, you've got an air intake tube coming in, and then you got to figure out where you're going to put your heater and how you're going to get your duct from where you mount it to inside the camper. If we were doing a camper conversion, like say on a cargo trailer, for instance, that might be a whole lot easier. And my buddy I was telling you about earlier, the one who's got that, that Out-O-Quit Pro air conditioner, he actually did a conversion on a cargo trailer, and he's using a diesel heater in one of those. And his hookup is a lot simpler than mine. Mine, what made it complex was where I ended up having to put the diesel heater in relation to the interior, and how to plumb everything. The other issue I had was, where am I going to put a diesel fuel can? Where's that going to go? And then on top of that, I really didn't like the can that came with the diesel heater. It was functional, but I just didn't feel warm and fuzzy about it, because it just felt like it was going to be a leak waiting to happen. That being said, I wanted to not have to fill that thing while it was in my vehicle. So what I did was I ended up purchasing a 5-gallon can. Actually, I already had the 5-gallon can. What I ended up purchasing was a conversion kit, and I bought a couple of them, but what I ended up using was one off of Amazon, to where you take just a 5-gallon jerry can and it's got a standpipe that goes in it, so you've got a really extended run can diesel. So our diesel heater, if it's just running on low, will probably run for the better part of 5 days plus on 5 gallons of diesel. And then when the time comes that I do have to go fill it up, I can disconnect it, take it out of the ambulance, fill it up, and then put it back in the camper. So that way I've got a minimum of amount. That way I've got the minimum chance that diesel's going to get to the inside of the rig. I can't fill anything that takes diesel up without getting it all over my hands, so that was important to me. I love diesel fuel. It's an amazingly efficient substance. What I don't like is smelling like diesel. Overall though, regrets on the diesel heater as a source of heat? Absolutely not. Now, we will, for the sake of redundancy, we will probably purchase a little buddy heater that runs on a propane bottle, one of those little propane bottles that you can get. And that way, if for some reason my Chinese diesel heater takes a dump on us, we've got that to use as a backup source of heat. I'm really big on redundancy, and absolutely you need to have redundancy when it comes to your heat source, because if it's 20 degrees outside, folks, when it's that cold out there, there's really no amount of blankets you can put on that's going to make you comfortable. So having that little buddy heater as a backup, that would be a tip I'd give to you. No doubt that would be a good one. Now, do I have regrets on the diesel heater? No. It's a dry heat. They're super cheap. They're super efficient. They're quiet. Well, if you're listening to this video now, I've actually got that diesel heater running, and if you hear anything, what you're probably hearing is the ticking noise of the fuel pump. Now, initially it was a little bit annoying, but honestly, I don't really mind it. Matter of fact, it's weirdly, it's kind of soothing, and you know what, at least if I hear that, I know I'm going to be warm.
The biggest part of the diesel heater that was the biggest challenge, I guess I should say, was it's not just the size of the unit you're dealing with, it's actually everything that attaches to it, like the intake and the exhaust. And here in this clip, you can kind of see that muffler hanging out there. I had just thumped it, so that's why it's sitting there dancing like that, but you could see the intake as well. I would recommend getting you one of these 5-gallon conversion kits, because this is going to enable you to run your diesel heater for several days without having to go fill up. In our case, being in an off-grid cabin, and the next place to go get diesel is pretty far away, having that ability is certainly an awesome ability to have.
Okay, so the solar. I put this project off for so long. As a matter of fact, I purchased my solar equipment over a year ago. We bought it not this year, but last year during the Thanksgiving, the Black Friday sale. Great deals on stuff, and it's now installed. It's functional. I haven't honestly had it outside but about twice to see how it does, but only because it gets super dark super quick here during this time of year, and I just haven't had the time on the weekends. I prefer to use my time to finish the build rather than test my solar. Now, I'll probably be doing a video soon on how that works, and if I get a little bit more than what I did the first day, which I think was around 300 watts off of a 1200 watt solar bank, but I'm certain it'll do better than that when the sun's straight up in the sky rather than being way off to the west like it was. Regrets on the solar? Yeah, a couple. And when I first got into solar, it was super intimidating to me. There was so many numbers. There's volts, there's amps, there's watts. There's kilowatts, there's solar inverter, or there's inverters. You know, there's so much new terminology if you've never been into solar power before, but it's really something that you could YouTube, you could read about it. I've done so much in terms of growth when it comes to my knowledge on solar in 1 year. It's just insane. But when I first purchased all this equipment, I hadn't done that yet. What I ended up purchasing, though, was a solar kit that came with a solar controller and 1200 watts of solar panels from Rich Solar. Super high quality stuff. I can't say enough good things about the quality of the product they sent me, but it does feel, looking back on it, knowing what I know now, that I could have gotten the same setup using alternative products for probably quite a bit less. So regrets wise, I just probably should have researched it a little bit more. I had the fear of missing out on that Black Friday sale. I got a pretty good deal on it, or at least I feel like I did. But folks, I'm telling you, do your homework on solar because it's not expensive. Well, it is expensive, but it's not near as bad as what you think it might be. There's so much good equipment out there that is not super expensive. You can go with the name brand stuff. Victron, for instance, it's like the Gold Seal standard when it comes to solar equipment. But folks, I'm telling you, you don't have to go with that, not for a camper build. And even if you do it on a cabin build, that's really up to you. There's so many products out there that are less costly and every bit as effective. Only other regret I would say, or the tip I would say for you, not really a regret, is to make sure that your solar battery bank is going to be big enough. I've got about 5.1 kilowatt hours of battery storage here, and honestly, that is right on the edge of not enough in order to run our air conditioner for, like, say 10 hours, for instance. If the sun goes down and I have to run that thing for 10 hours, I'm probably going to be out of juice in the morning. Matter of fact, we're going to see how that works probably the first time it starts getting warm, and it's really, really possible that I'm going to end up buying a third 24-volt battery to go ahead and add into parallel with the two that I already have. Your power consumption is going to be your big determining factor when it comes to your solar, so be surgical, figure out what you're going to be running, and plan accordingly is all I could say.
Okay, well, before we put all the solar on the roof, I just wanted to jig it up on the ground because we're going to have to modify that rack that the solar sits on. And once we did modify it, things went pretty smooth, but we had to go ahead and do a dry fit on the top of the camper, which is kind of what you're seeing here. It looks like a bed frame up there, but that gave us the idea of how much we had to go ahead and trim off the ends. All in all, I want to say that we probably had to trim off about a foot, maybe a foot and a half of the width, because this rack was actually designed for a Sprinter van. Obviously, it wasn't designed for an ambulance. Ambulances do not have solar, but that's where your ability to go ahead and improvise and modify existing equipment to fit your application come in. What we used to go ahead and attach these brackets to the roof of the camper, in this case you can't see it, but we ended up using self-tapping screws and panel bond adhesive. But what we ended up with was a rock solid dual rack setup, which you can see here. This is the one in the rear, and as we scroll forward here, we've got another one that matches the same size with the same solar array sitting on the front. All in all, we plugged it in, and by gosh, everything worked. Now, granted, the day that we plugged it in was overcast, but it worked, and it's going to work well.
So if you've made it to this point in the video, first of all, thank you. Thank you guys for your support. Thank every one of you. We're a small channel at this point, so I've said it many times, every watch hour counts and every single subscriber counts. Every comment that you make has offered something to me, and I try to reply to every comment that gets sent in for that reason. They really do mean a ton to me, so thank you. The whole reason that we're building this camper, like I stated earlier, it's to have a dwelling to live in and live in comfortably while we basically build our off-grid cabin. Now, we've gotten really, really lucky. On the land that we purchased, there is a cabin shell already there. So like it's a cabin kit pretty much. All the hard stuff's done. There's a roof up and there's walls. Unfortunately, that's really all there is. There's no water, there's no interior walls, there's no floor, no ceiling. Everything that we've done here on this camper build is going to be in some way duplicated going over onto that cabin property. And the Freedom Adventure has been about this conversion process on the ambulance here. But the whole reason to do this was, we've had this grand plan all along, was to go ahead and buy this property. Honestly, we didn't think it would happen this fast. We figured we were probably a couple of years out at best. We got really lucky and we just decided to go for it.
So before we sign out, I just want to go ahead and show you a quick overview of the property that we ended up with. And folks, it's beautiful. And this is on the side of a mountain in southeast Oklahoma. I don't think we could have chosen a better property for us. The fact that the cabin's there already, man, that it just makes things so much easier, and it puts us ahead of schedule, probably about 2 to 3 years. After all, that was going to be the biggest single portion and the most difficult portion for us being do-it-yourselfers to go ahead and accomplish. The fact that that's already done, man, that's amazing.
Keep watching these videos, folks. If this has been fun for you to watch, if they've offered any value at all, continue to watch because they're going to get better. We're going to do so much cool stuff out there, and I want each and every one of you along for the ride. Tell folks about it. If they're interested in it, join on board. There's plenty of room. There's so many projects that we're going to end up doing out there. As a matter of fact, I plan on doing some collaborations videos with that friend of mine I was telling you who's a YouTuber. And he just happens to have a lot of equipment that is going to come in really, really handy for the development of our property and for some of the things that we plan on doing on that property as well. But all that's to come. And it's going to be coming here sooner than later. We've got to get through this winter. And there's a couple rather large things that we're going to have to purchase in order to continue on out there. And we're working on that. As a matter of fact, I'll have a video coming up soon on some of the electrical, or the solar generator that we're opting to use, at least up front. Thank you so much for watching. I really, really hope to see you in the future on those future videos that we've got coming. This whole camper build, it's coming to an end in terms of the build, but it's just the beginning in terms of its use, and there's going to be plenty more videos on this as well. I hope I see you there, folks. I really appreciate you watching. Happy adventures, folks, and I'll see you soon. Y'all take care.